Okay, so moving on to the most frequently asked SAQs in the MUHS exam. So the first one we will be taking up is mention any 8 causes for non-union of a fractured fragments of mandible. So as we were taught in the HSET sessions that initially beginning with an SAQ, we are supposed to give 2-3 lines of introduction and then start with the SAQ. So giving 2-3 lines of introduction for non-union. Non-union is basically the lack of osseous union between two or more fracture fragments after the usual 6 to 8 week of healing period. So basically what happens is even after fixation, that is joining the two fractured parts, there is no bony complete or there is no bony union occurring even after the 6 to 8 week of healing period. So that is known as non-union. A fracture with non-union generally forms a structural resemblance to a fibrous joint and is often called as a false joint or a pseudo-arthrosis. So this can be asked as an MCQ that what is the how does the non-union fracture or what does it resemble to? So it resembles to a fibrous joint which is known as pseudo-arthrosis. So here we can see that the fractured segments have been fixated, but there is no union between the two bony parts. So now coming to the causes of the non-union. So first cause is the infection of the fractured site. So these are the various reasons by which infection can occur. First is the non-vital tooth in the line of fracture. So the non-vital tooth can basically become a nidus of infection and can cause uh, delay in the healing of the bone. Then pre-existing acute infections like gingivitis and periodontitis, contamination of bone pins, wires or screws, open fractures which get contaminated by the saliva or exposed to the external environment, foreign bodies like tooth fragments, root tips, denture fragments or any external objects. So we can just basically enumerate these points under infection of the fracture site. Now coming to the second cause is inadequate reduction and immobilization. So extensive mobility has the propensity to inhibit initial callus formation, thereby causing non-union of the fractured segments. So even if after it, if we do not mobilize the fracture properly, so due to excessive mobility, there can be the initial callus formation does not occur. Hence, those fragments do not unite together and there is non-union. Then inadequate reduction with a gap between the fractured segments which prevents bone-to-bone contact can also cause a non-union. Now the third point is unsatisfactory apposition of the bone ends with interposition of the soft tissues. So basically what happens if there is any soft tissue like a muscle or a tissue part which comes in between those two bony ends, so it does not allow those two bone ends to grow back or unite together. Then inadequate blood supply to the fractured site, causing necrosis of the bone on either side of the fractured sites. Then presence of any bony pathology like cyst or tumors. Then the next is loss of bone and soft tissue as a result of severe trauma. Then systemic conditions like, as we all know, osteoporosis, severe nutritional deficiencies, diabetes, hyperparathyroidism. These basically affect the calcium metabolism. So hence they cause a delay in healing and non-union occurs. Then the eighth one is ultra thin edentulous mandibles in elderly patients with debilitating disease. So basically what happens in elderly patient, there is reduced ability to form bony union, which may be attributable to decrease in age-related healing factor, and there is often a decrease in the bone height and width. So basically as our age increases, the healing factors also decrease, and hence there is a decrease in the bone height and width. So because of which there is a lack of bone quality and quantity, and this compromises the vascularity of the bone, further complicating in the healing. And if any concomitant systemic condition or medications which are taken by the patient can result in non-union by altering with the natural healing potential of the body. So to summarize my answer, here is a very small mnemonic to remember everything. As we all know that for treating a fracture, we need to splint it. So S stands for soft tissue interposition, P stands for reduction, L stands for the location of the fractured site, I stands for the infection, N stands for the nutritional disorders, and T stands for tumor and pathology. So now coming to the next question, this is the most commonly asked question and it can also be asked as a part of an LAQ, that describe various approaches to the angle of the mandible. So now as we know, there are two different types of approaches to the angle. One is the intraoral approach and one is the extraoral approach. In intraoral approach, we have the posterior vestibular approach, and in the extraoral, we have three, that is through an existing laceration, or what we call it as a cut or a wound, then a submandibular approach and retromandibular approach. So now beginning with the extraoral approaches, through an existing laceration. In some cases, access to the fractured fragments is done through an already existing laceration, like as we can see over here. Then it is done by following the Langer's lines or relaxed skin tension lines. So basically what Langer's lines are, they are linear clefts in the skin that indicate direction of orientation of the collagen fibers. So while doing any extraoral surgical procedure, a surgeon has to basically know the direction of the Langer's lines, because if we make an incision parallel to these Langer's lines, hence there will be an increase, the fast healing can occur and minimal scar tissue will be left after the healing. Then second is the submandibular approach, also known as the resistance approach. This approach is mainly indicated for fractures which are not suitable by intraoral approach, like in cases of severe trismus, where the patient is not able to completely open, or if there is a huge fracture, or if there is a compound fracture, this kind of approach is done. The incision is placed 1.5 to 2 centimeter below the inferior border of the mandible. So why do we do this is because of these structures that we encounter while giving the incision, which is the marginal mandibular nerve, which is a branch of the facial nerve, facial artery, and facial vein. So here we can see the relationship of in this diagram, the relationship of the facial artery, the facial vein, and the marginal mandibular nerve, marginal mandibular branch of the facial nerve. So we need to take care of these structures because we don't want the marginal mandibular nerve to get cut, because it supplies the lower lip and the muscles, facial muscles. So we don't want this nerve to get transected. Now in the retromandibular or Heinz approach, in this type of approach, a vertical incision is placed behind the posterior border of the ramus of mandible, 0.5 to 1 centimeter below the lobe of the ear. So here, as we can see, a vertical incision is made behind, posterior to the ramus, and 0.5 to 1 centimeter below the earlobe. So the biggest advantage of this procedure is that the distance from the skin incision to the area of interest is reduced as compared to the submandibular approach. So like we saw in submandibular, we have to make a very big incision and then we have to approach to the angle. But in retromandibular, we are just making an incision behind the posterior border of ramus, so we can directly approach to the mandible. Hence, minimum tissue invasion or minimum tissue is cut in this. So as we can see, the vertical incision. Now the structures which are encountered during this approach are the facial nerve and the retromandibular vein, which is also known as the posterior facial vein. So here, as we can see in the diagram, the trunk of the facial nerve, which leaves the stylomastoid foramen. So it is very near to the earlobe. So we need to be very careful. Hence, To avoid this, we do a blunt dissection through the parotid gland, spreading in the direction of the fibers of the facial nerve. Now moving on to the intraoral approach, which is the posterior vestibular approach. So sorry. This is an intraoral approach preferred for simple fracture or closed fractures. The incision is placed posterior to the third molar, 5 mm away from the attached gingiva. That is basically in the vestibule. Now the most important thing which we are supposed to do is skeletonization, that is freeing of the mental nerve, which is done before retraction of the soft tissue. Why is this basically done is because if we need to do an aggressive retraction of the soft tissues, the mental nerve should not get the mental nerve should not get injured. That means there should not be any kind of traction injury, because of which there can be as we all know that neuropraxia or axonotomesis can occur because of that. So first we need to free this mental nerve so that we can get a better retraction of the soft tissues. Then the most important part is the nerve to be taken care of during this approach is the sensory buccal nerve, which is a branch of the trigeminal mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve, and which is usually at a risk of transection during this approach. So as we can see, the buccal nerve, which runs very closely, and it supplies to the muscles of the cheeks and the second molar and the third molar. So we really don't want this nerve to get transected. So how can we avoid this? So hence, to avoid it, a blunt dissection is carried out as soon as the lower coronoid notch is reached. So this is the type of incision. This is the incision. This is the buccal nerve. This is the incision line going, and this is the skeletonization of the mental nerve. So now advantages of the procedures are the intraoral approach. There is less risk of damage to the facial nerve as we are doing an intraoral approach. Then there is no formation of hypertrophic scar and ability to confirm occlusion during the surgery. This is a very important part because in fracture usually we see that there is disharmony in the occlusion. So the oral surgeon can basically confirm the occlusion while doing the surgery. In extraoral approach, the advantages are there is better visualization and accessibility to the surgical field. Then greater intraoperative sterility can be maintained, and direct application of plate fixation can be done. Then disadvantages of each procedures are the intraoral approach. There is inadequate access to the surgical site, and there is increased chances of the infection. And in extraoral approach, there is risk of injury to the facial nerve, and it leaves an anesthetic scar, more time consuming as compared to the intraoral approach, and longer recovery period is seen in the extraoral approach. So thank you very much. Stay safe.